from my experience, when we started teaching the clean pull, the snatch pull, all the high pull things, normally non-weightlifters, it takes 2 months to kind of familiar with all the patterns, but a BMPJ, they can do pretty well in 2 weeks. So yeah, I wouldn't say this is better than the pulling exercise. I'm big lover of pulling exercise. I'm big lover of power clean, power snatch. But I just saying this is an alternative way, and especially for those non-weightlifting athletes, they are eager to see the effect of those exercises.
Hi, Mark. It's my pleasure to have you on Evidence Strong Show. If you could briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for inviting me to your show. And I've been watching your video and podcast for a while. And I think this is very valuable information for people who love in weightlifting. I didn't expect you gonna send this invitation to me. So pleasure is mine. And so let me introduce myself a little bit. I'm currently working as an associate professor at the National Taiwan Sports University. And also, at the meanwhile, Taiwan Institute of Sports Science just established 2 years ago. So I am currently also the adjunct associate researcher at the TISS as well. In terms of my background, I earned my PhD in sports physiology and performance back in 2014 at East Tennessee State University under Professor Mike Stone. So ever since that, I came back to my hometown and Taiwan, the home country, and started working as a volunteer strength and conditioning coach. And the associate position opened after 6 months. So I took the position, did the research and teaching and coaching at the same time until now.
So your research is in behind neck push jack. So why behind neck push jack?
Oh, yes. So if we look at the literature, I think around the 10 years from the 2014, most of the study, especially the weightlifting derivatives exercise, focusing on the pulling exercise. And of course, pulling is the I would say the major exercise people would love to use for developing power and developing the weightlifting technique. However, me myself, I am not weightlifter. Although I've been studying and been doing the weightlifting exercise, so I always have that thought, maybe we can have some different types of derivatives. So not until I think that 2020-ish, there was the paper published in Sports Medicine talking about the overhead derivatives. So I thought, why not? And this might be the alternative because for the jerk exercise, some people traditionally we have to jerk in from our neck. So how about some athletes, they are not weightlifting athletes, but they still want to have some transfer effect from the repetitive exercise. How about the behind neck? So I didn't do the study in the beginning. I just try it and then try to implement on myself and my athletes. And then turns out the adaptation was surprising. So I started to think maybe we need to do some research on this type of exercise. So that was the story of behind neck push jerk.
All right. So today we'll be talking about two studies you run or two papers you have published on the same population of people. So we'll go into that. But before we do, we have to talk a little bit about the methods of prescribing. Because if you want the Olympic weightlifting derivative be used for anything, you will run into the problem how to load it, how heavy it should be.
Exactly.
So what are our options and which one you chose and why?
Okay, so before we go to the procedure, I have something to add about a behind neck push jerk. First of all, accepting the range of motion, the mobility issue of the shoulder, this is very similar to what we did for the back squat. So first of all, we put a bar on our shoulder, like upper trapezius, and then it's easily for most of the athletes to accelerate, to have that acceleration feeling from that position. And then that way we can kind of focus on the concentric part of this BMPJ exercise. And anecdotally, one of my former master student, because this exercise, he increased almost 12 centimeter of vertical drop.
Wow.
And then, so if we really think about the pattern, like dip before the drive, the thrust, the drive, it's very similar to most of athletic movement, like the strategy wise and then, the velocity wise. So were very similar. So goes to how to load it. That was the first question I had, because once I have a group of athletes and I will try to prescribe this exercise, that was very difficult, because that comes to the question of, should we use the 1RM base, meaning we have to test all of them, or should we just use their body mass? So I think that was the question when you look at the paper, that was the first question we got. So scientifically, we use a 1RM base because it's been validated, and it's a very scientific way to prescribe low. Yeah, so basically those group of participants, they are familiar with BMPJ. So I didn't use my athletes. It's because I want to make sure like every one of our participants knew and executed it very well. There's no technical issue on doing this exercise. So we have 2 separate sessions. So the first session was for the 1RM test. So they came to the lab for I did the warm up, and I did the warm up for the BMPJ, and then we're just trying to gauge what's the 80 to 90% of perceived effort weights, and just run to make sure that they are familiar, they're comfortable with those weights, and then they test their 1RM in 5 trials. So every time when they successfully lift, we just add about 2.5% until we test their 1RM BMPJ. So that's their first session. For the second session, that was a little bit tricky because we had to decide either the 1RM base or the body mass base. So say we had their 1RM the weights already, so we measure their weight on that day. So we try to calculate the weights of 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80% of their body mass weight and their 1RM base weight. Okay, so that was the 2 separate tests they had to go through. So in that case, we decided which one went first based on the absolute weight. So say I have a big guy came in and their body mass was extremely high. So we went the body mass section first, and then a 1RM base second. So everyone had a different order for either the 1RM or the body mass.
Sorry, Mark. Body weight based loading would be 80% of their actual body weight. That would be the loading.
Yes. So 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80 for their body weight, but also the 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 from their 1RM. We test, at least 48 hours prior to the testing session. Yeah. So they had to do 3 consecutive BMPJ successfully. So meaning we had video recording, myself and my students who certify as a professional person supervise the session. So every time they successfully finish one intensity, they rest 5 minutes before they start the next intensity. Say after the 80%, either the 1RM base or the body weight base, they had 15 minutes rest between the session. Just make sure they did not fatigue too much to go through the second session. And meanwhile, they test those exercise on the 2 sets of Kistler force plate. So we collect the force type data. We analyze the kinetic and kinematic data afterwards. We recruit totally 16 participants who were not weightlifters specifically. The reason for that is we try to create ecological validity. So after this study, I can use this information for general population either, or, the athletic population. The average 1RM BMPJ was about 1.2 of their own body weight. So that wasn't very good, but that wasn't bad. Yeah, so that was my participants.
So definitely not beginners in behind neck push jerk, but maybe not at the elite weightlifter level.
Yeah, not.
Were they only males?
Yeah, it's only the male. We analyze the peak force, the mean force, peak power, mean power, impulse, and also system mass velocity, but also their propulsive time. And then, so those are the kinetic and the kinematic data we analyze. Basically, I would say simply the 1RM base from each intensity were greater from kinetic perspective, superior than the body mass method. However, for kinematic data, there wasn't different between the body mass and the one arm base method. Yeah, that was kind of surprising because people always thought this is not right. Especially when we submit our paper and every reviewer say this does not make any sense because based on the velocity based concept, when you're using heavier load, your barbell velocity is going to drop. However, we specifically point out we did not measure barbell velocity. We're using the center of mass velocity, also called the system velocity, to measure. The reason for that is because we're trying to rule out some factors that will influence the barbell velocity. And then so we use the system velocity instead. Yeah, and then we found there wasn't no difference between two methods, but there wasn't difference between different intensity as well. That was kind of interesting. And then yeah, that was basically what we found.
Okay, I have two questions. One is why, and the other is what does it mean for the coach?
Okay. I mean, why the kinematics
Because-
didn't change?
Yeah.
When we did the heavier load, for example, like 70 and 80, we got the most effect from force and power. And because that was because the external loading and
Yes.
you're trying to overcome the external loading. However, from the strategy perspective, when we use a heavier load, we tend to dip a little bit more in order to have that concentric time. So in our paper, we didn't mention the eccentric portion. However, we observed, we didn't analyze like in detail, but we observed. And this is very typical even for weightlifters. Like you can tell like when the heavier load, they have that like kind of mindset, oh, I know this is the dip, but it's not a normal dip when we use the lighter load. And then so they dip a little bit longer in order to have the bigger impulse when they do the propulsive phase. Yeah, so we only measure the propulsive phase and then we calculate the system velocity. I think that was the one of the reason why the system velocity didn't change that much and it didn't have the statistical significance across different intensities. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. So what was your second question?
How coaches should understand it?
Good question, because I think I can answer that from two different perspectives. First, if we want to have the most out of it from this exercise, which are strength and power production, we definitely go heavier load because in this exercise, we didn't have a lot of constraint from the technical itself. We just go the upright position, go all the way through. So technical is not the issue. And then we get the most of the strength and then power and an impulse from heavier intensity. So 70 to 80% were the intensity I would definitely recommend it. Even we didn't test the weightlifter, but I guess that would be very similar. However, if we look at this from the practical perspective, it also can use the kinematic data we analyze to apply for those people or for those population. For example, like a novice, they just started to learn this exercise and we didn't want them to use a heavier load. And then they still can keep that relatively similar velocity, especially their system velocity. And that was a good thing because we didn't want them to lose that, propulsive motion. We want them to exert the force as fast as possible. But if they had the limitation from the force and power production, we still have that speed aspect from this exercise. So I think it all depends on what your population, who you're training, and what's your purpose. And then we can take that information from these two perspectives.
Okay, so now you tested two methods, loading according to the body weight and loading according to 1 RM. How would you distinguish which method you should use as a coach and for whom?
Yeah, so if I am a weightlifting coach, I would definitely go to 1 RM because the reason is simple. We want to precisely prescribe our load. And then we can do that individually and regularly because this is part of the training process. Yeah, so the 1 RM best will be something I would definitely recommend it for a weightlifting coach. Maybe we can do some study on the weightlifting population later on. However, if I'm working like me, I work with a group of athletes for 30, sometimes like 50. Our taekwondo athlete, they have like 50 people in one team. 2014. They're barely possible to test their 1RM. And then some of them, they are new, we say the novice to this type of exercise. In that case, the body mass method may be very handy. So when I prescribe low, this is very handy. And then we can go from there. Because I know the purpose for this exercise is trying to create the biomechanical similarities instead of like absolute force and power. And then when I train them for 1 or 2 years, and then they're familiar with every execution of this exercise, and then the strength and power will become like more and more important, I can start to test their 1RM. So that's the point from my view.
Awesome. Should we talk a little bit more on the second study and about the kinematics and kinetics of a power jerk in general?
The reason we further analyzed and create the second study was from the practical perspective, right? People want to know like what intensity should I use if I want to get the most of strength and power, even the impulse. So we compare different intensity all the way from 40 to 80% of their 1RM BMPJ weight. And some of the reviewer asked me the question why you didn't go higher, say 90% or 95%. And the answer of mine was in practical setting, we did not often do 1 rep. So for example, for this exercise, they may do like 2 reps or 3 reps. That's why I created it as a like 3 repetition instead of 1. And consider they were not weightlifters, so I didn't go above 80%. So that was the limitation of this study. However, when we compare all the way from the 40 to 80% of the intensity, the heavier they were, the weight, the higher of their force, impulse, and power. So in other words, if you want to get the most of the training effect, the heavier weight was the better. And then kinematically, that was surprising because they didn't change a lot. They decreased a little bit, just we just mentioned, they may change their strategy but from that concentric portion of their center of mass velocity, that didn't change a lot. So it gave us a very important information, which we already know. You have to generate the force and power no matter what intensity you are using currently. Yeah, so even we change our strategy for the deep portion, we still can get a very good velocity during that concentric portion. So I think that's the most important information from the study too. So the application from the study, it was the pros and cons, right? If someone like me, they are trying to work with athletes and then trying to get that triple extension strategy and explosive strength and power, I would recommend BMPJ because like from my experience, when we started teaching the clean pull, the snatch pull, all the high pull things, normally non-weightlifters, it takes 2 months to kind of familiar with all the patterns, but a BMPJ, they can do pretty well in 2 weeks. So yeah, I wouldn't say this is better than the pulling exercise. I'm big lover of pulling exercise. I'm big lover of power clean, power snatch. But I just saying this is an alternative way, and especially for those non-weightlifting athletes, they are eager to see the effect of those exercises. That might be the alternative way to let them feel. So just get back to the beginning of our talk, our conversation, why I started to look at the BMPJ. That was because some of my athletes, they just jump higher and higher and higher. And I didn't expect that because that was the stage I was trying to teach them the pulling technique. And then you didn't see that like very often, right? You assume they have that stable technique for a while and then start to see like they start to increase all the jumps, all the sprinting performance. But the PNPJ I think that's different way to make people understand how to accelerate our body.
You mentioned that behind neck push jack was very effective in improving jumping, specifically the height of the jump. Would it be more transferable also to improve upper body?
Thanks for your question. This is a very important part of using BMPJ. Just for clear, when I say they jump higher, that was anecdotally because in science, we believe evidence, right? So I should do some training intervention study to see like how good they were, like how higher they improved from beginning to the end. However, in terms of the upper body, we have a lot of athletes. They have to do the overhead pattern. Say volleyball player, and then in Asia, the baseball is a big population. Yeah, and then swimming as well, even they're in water, but they still do like overhead. And then one of the things I found for the BMPJ was when you try to catch the ball, it's not only your lower body try to stop yourself, but the upper body, when a coach name, we say lock out the elbow and your shoulder blade. And then that creates the stability of your upper body region. And then since it is a jerk exercise, it's not pressing exercise. So I would say for the maximize the upper body strength might be questionable, but that sudden stop or that kind of stability effect, I would say that will help athletes to understand when they do the overhead, where their shoulder blade, where their elbow should be, and then in order to transfer that force from from their trunk to their arm. And of course, this is also anecdotally. Yeah, so from around now on, I can collect data if I have enough resources for the motion analysis system, combine that with the force plate to see if there is a training effect for those type of overhead athletes. So this is the experience from one of our very famous pitcher, and he told me, he shared this with me, like after a couple weeks, he felt more stable to control the baseball when they release. If we think about that, when they do the overhead, they have to go through this position and then release the ball in front of their body. So if they can have like a more stable position in here, the chances are they're probably more stable when they release the ball. Yeah, so that's also the other intriguing aspect from the PMPJ, and hopefully I can do more study on this exercise.
Just a note, I just released the interview with Emily Neff, who is using Olympic weightlifting derivatives to train adolescent female athletes. And as you may know, and coaches will know, the adolescent females and males too, have lots of issues with coordination. The body is changing, the hormones are raging, and so on. So she finds Olympic weightlifting very effective because she argues this is a skill-based sport. So it requires not only the physical adaptation, but also the neural component to adjust. So all the balance, stabilization, coordination of all the muscles, that is very challenged with Olympic weightlifting, and therefore is adapting, which we want in sports.
Yeah, since you mentioned, can I share something of my experience on this? When we start to teach those pulling exercise, one of the difficulty for athletes to understand is the power position. So they don't understand why you need to accelerate after the bar passed your knee, and then the higher speed happen after the power position. But if they do the BMPJ, they know exactly how to thrust themselves. And I would argue that's the coordination. Like you need to do something right in order to execute the exercise. So if I teach BMPJ first of all, they don't have the shoulder issue, because for some athletes, it's very hard to get them to catch the ball overhead under that situation, under that stress. But if they don't have the shoulder issues, they learn how to get the right timing to thrust themselves and to catch the ball. It's easier to teach them to do the pulling exercise because they know, okay, this is the feeling. Yeah, so since you brought that up, I think the coordination is also the thing, and a neural issue is also the thing. And there's a lot of benefits from those weightlifting exercise, even for their overhead derivative exercise.
Just to finish, 2 more questions. The first one is, what is your favorite lift?
What is my favorite lift? Yeah, that's a difficult question for weightlifter lovers, right? Yeah, you have to like answer carefully. And then for me, yeah, pulling exercise. Yeah, because the limitation for BMPJ is the intensity. Because for novice athletes, I can teach them the feeling of the thrust. But the intensity wise, I need to be very careful. Pulling, you don't have that consideration. I can use the strap. I don't have to pull that high, just like you said, but you still get that adaptation from the pulling exercise. So I would say that's why I mentioned BMPJ is a good tool, but it's only good when they have the adequate strength level to using the heavier load to get the max amount of the strength and power adaptation from the BMPJ. So I'll say still pulling exercise are my favorite.
Awesome. And the last question is where people can find you if they want to follow your work and get all the research.
Yeah, so if they want to know more about Asian training or industry, they can follow me on the Instagram. My Instagram account is NTSU Sports Performance Team. So I use my school's group to create an account. So those are, when people want to know like how you Asian people do strength and conditioning, they can find this information over there. But if they want to know my research, they can go to ResearchGate, type my Chinese name, CHIEHYING. My last name is CHIANG. Yeah, so that's my ResearchGate account. So I put all my research on my ResearchGate, yes.
Thank you so much, Mark. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you, Alex.